I'll call the April 23rd Board of Selectmen meeting to order. If you'd please stand and join me in the pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just so everyone's aware, the meeting is being audio and video recorded and will be shown on local access television. We're here tonight for one purpose, and that's to discuss the FY19 budget and take a vote on a recommendation. So I guess what we'll do is we'll just run through it quickly line by line. We can probably skip a lot of the smaller ones where there aren't any changes by either David or the changes that Denise submitted. So let me just get the... Okay. Yep. So we'll start with moderator. I don't think anyone has any recommended changes to that. Board of Selectmen, Denise, did you have a chance to review these? I know that they weren't originally in your binder. Did you receive them?
I did receive them. I didn't have a chance to review it, but I agree with it.
Okay. Finance Committee, $3,100. No changes. FinCom Reserve, $67,000, no changes. Accountant, it looks like no one had any recommended changes. Assessors, David had recommended a reduction of $1,000. Denise, did you want to speak to your recommendation?
First, I want to apologize. I have laryngitis, so if you can't understand or hear me, sorry. I recommended a change of $5,350, a reduction, and the reason for that reduction was to, with regards to two specific lines. One was for $350 for the preservation of current records. In my opinion, preserving any records that they're currently producing is part of the job. And regarding the $5,000, we were assured by hiring a full-time assessor, we would see an increase in tax revenue, and that assessor would be able to accomplish more during the daytime. Based on that, I thought a $5,000 reduction in that line was appropriate.
Okay. So I'm assuming you're referring to the Patriot contract, right? The contract with Patriot. I believe that's still under contract, so I don't think that could be reduced without breaching that contract. I know it was mentioned at town meeting by, I think, Steve McCarthy, that there could potentially be a savings, but I think that savings was when it went back out to bid, the Patriot contract. I know that a lot of the justification for the full-time assessor by the board was for the appeals or abatements. And what was the first, records?
So there's
So that is,
$350 allocated for the preservation of the current records.
Mhm.
And like I said, in my opinion, if you're copying or storing present records, that's part of the job.
so do you know, I don't know what they do to preserve the records. Is that an outside firm that makes copies or digitizes them? Do you know, David?
So, I don't know if it's an outside firm, but I had a conversation with the principal assessor today. You will see that they spend about $320 to $349 a year in this line. And the reason is twofold, is that your current commitment books, which is what everybody gets taxed on, those are being bound now, so that way at a later date, they don't have to be preserved. And the second is that whenever they do their fees with the Registry of Deeds, it comes out of that line as well. So what I was told today is that the CPA funds are being utilized to preserve old records that are decades old, if not close to 100 years old. The $350 is part of their operational expenses for current year, records. According to him, it's just It's just something that they do on an annual basis.
Seems a little odd to have something so minute broken down into a separate line item and simply not covered under general expenses, but
I mean, I'd agree with that, but, I mean, it seems like something they utilize every year within.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, because I've worked in 2 other towns, we do a lot of breaking down. Most other towns just have general expenses, so they group 8 lines. We separate them out. And then under Patriots Properties, what Steve McCarthy, as Chairman McCarthy, had stated was that they had signed the contract, so it would be a breach of contract if we didn't go forward on it. But what he stated was that because John was now full-time, some of the work that they didn't have to do before, they won't have to do going forward. So therefore, it was flat year over year, because in the past, it had continued to escalate. So,
I think that's why we voted in the first place. We thought that would cut down that line. And, we had somebody in-house who could do some of these things.
instead that line item's going up year over year. But just so I understand, David, so they negotiated the contract with Patriot knowing that they would be bringing on a full-time assessor?
I'm just going by what Steve said in the meeting. I've not spoken to Steve about it.
Well, if it's a contractual obligation that will breach, then I guess there's no option. It's unfortunate that it was contracted knowing we were bringing on a full-time assessor.
Yeah, I mean, but at this point, I know they still utilize Patriot for the services that they're paying for, and I don't think now we can change it. Maybe in the future when the contract is up.
So, David, you recommended a $1,000 reduction. Where were you taking that from?
Yep, they have equipment replacement, and they budget $2,000 every year, and so I was just level funding them at the $2,000. They were looking to add $1,000. They didn't provide any justification that, for instance, there was something special this year, so as a result, I didn't see the need for the increase.
Okay. For this one, I'd agree with David's recommendation. I don't know if anyone else has any input on the assessors.
No, I'll make a motion to accept the $1,000 as recommended by David.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We can actually wait until the end if you want, and then what would that be easier, David, to do it all at once, or would you rather do it one by one?
Yeah,
to
only because-
keep it less confusing.
Right.
Okay. Next is the treasurer collector's budget. David did not recommend any change. Denise, you had recommended a $2,000 decrease. I did have a chance to read this. That is the treasurer's accurate salary increase.
I believe that was a 7% increase that I thought was a little high, but again, not to dissuade anyone from commenting, but obviously that's another contract that's already been agreed to, and reducing it would be a breach, so I have no problem going along with the recommendation of no change to that line.
Okay. Just to let you know, so what we did here with the treasurer was we split his promotional increase into 2 years. We decided not to give it to him all right away, and then after his probationary period, move it up to the full amount that we agreed upon. So it still is a $23,000 decrease from last year after the previous long-time treasurer had left, retired.
So, I would just make sure that we're on the same page. Are you, as a board, if you could just let me know what number you're supporting?
The 314,297. Sorry.
I think that's the town administrator recommendation of
Just want
$314,297.
to confirm that that's what you're
I'll make a
doing.
motion to accept that.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, up next is town council. Denise, did you want to speak to that one quickly?
I'm recommending a reduction of $7,000 to bring it to $80,000. I know David has explained that we've spent approximately $100,000 in the last fiscal year. However, that also, I'm assuming, includes the Kruger case, which I believe we spent close to $25,000 on. if not more. And I believe that by having more consistent and concise contracts, we can hopefully avoid future costs related to litigation when it comes to labor. Additionally, we may have some training required or needed in HR contract law or establishing these contracts, and we can avoid some of these litigation costs going forward. So again, right off the bat, without a Kruger case, we're saving $25,000.
I mean, we hope that we don't have to spend any of this, but we don't know what the next lawsuit's gonna be. We got, in my opinion, a frivolous one a couple weeks ago about a dump that we used in the 70s. I mean, we can't predict what cases are gonna come our way. And as far as contracts go, I know that right now, I don't believe town council reviews any of our non-union contracts. I think that's strictly David. So I think we've been pretty good at limiting the use of town council. I would hate to reduce it and be in a position where we wouldn't be able to utilize council and then end up making the wrong decision by not getting the input from our attorney.
I agree with you. I think that, especially with the litigations coming in, and some of it we don't even know, and like we got the surprise the other day from Rhode Island, that I think we'd be safe, and with all this thing and the cuts that we make or the cuts we don't make there, and we only have so much on the FinCom reserves, and I don't see that thing being boosted up. So, and when it comes to legal, we got to defend the town.
Do we know, well, I believe what David had presented with regards to that landfill case is an option to settle that without even going into litigation, which means it would be virtually very low, if any, legal expenses on our part.
Yeah, so obviously, we don't know how it's going to come about. At this point, we're hoping to be able to negotiate with them. We don't know as to whether or not they're going to be reasonable in the negotiations. I mean, they're just looking for us to cut a check $42,000 and walk away. And obviously, we wouldn't be good stewards with the taxpayer money if we weren't paying attention. But obviously, we're incurring legal fees as those conversations go. If they decide that they want $42,000 and that's it, we have to then make a decision: do we defend ourselves or do we pay $42,000? That's one particular case. I think that what's frustrating about that is that these cases just come out of thin air. And two items I just want to make note for clarification from a clarification standpoint. We are still defending the town 5 years later for a police officer who's on his fifth appeal. You know, it is costing us $15,000 a year to just continue to write briefs that we keep winning. But it only takes a couple of employees, and you consume $80,000 pretty quick. And the last is that the $100,000 that I was referring to in legal fees all occurred prior to me. But many of those years, we did spend north of $100,000, and we have tried to take as much in-house as we can. So we've actually lowered that budget through the years.
So just so I understand, we spent $25,000 defending the Kruger case, but yet $75,000 pretty much covered everything else. That's an unusual number.
About $22,000 of it was paid from the water department.
Okay, but that came out of their fund, not the general fund. Okay. Well,
I'll make a motion, we don't touch that budget, we leave it alone.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that one will remain at 87,000. Okay, information systems, I don't think anyone has a recommendation. Same thing with cable TV. Town clerk. Okay, no changes to that one, but the elections one, David had recommended a reduction of $1,450 Denise, you have another recommendation.
Yes, I recommended $3,334. Specific lines reduced, and I'm not sure where David came up with his number of $1,450, but I looked at the federal census coordinator as part of the daily duties, and I also looked at the fact the requested budget was almost $33,000. It was an approximate $6,000 increase over fiscal year 2018. The numbers were not adding up for me, so I came out with the $3,334. I think I also looked back to prior years, like 2016 and prior to that. I believe 2016 was a big election, so I would have thought those costs would have been significantly more, but they weren't.
Yeah, so when I looked at the analysis on this, there's no doubt that there is an increase there. So that's why, one reason why $1,450 I reduced. I did that out of the election officials line because she was looking for a 100% increase. I thought that was just too much of an increase. Her concerns are twofold. One is that 2018 is going to be an election year. We're going to have more primaries this year than we did last year, and as a result, we'll incur more expense than we did this current fiscal year. The second issue with that is that we now have early voting requirements that we did not have in years past. So she is informing me, and I've spoken to some other town clerks as well, but she's informing me that she now has more mandates placed on her in reference to early voting. So every single time that there is a primary, she has to have early voting. So she will have one in August, September, and then she'll have another one in October, November. And so that's why she was looking for more money. My opinion is that the most she had ever spent was $6,000. If I gave her some breathing room, or recommended some breathing room, is that we brought it up to say $7,000. That would give her a little bit of the money she's looking for, but not the full amount. And then the difference also is the $1,334 from the federal consensus coordinator. That is part of doing the 10-year consensus census, which is a requirement of federal law. We know that the last one was 2010, the new one will be 2020. This was new to me, but Annie explained to me that the town has always paid previous town clerks an additional stipend, because obviously there's extra work, and you do it over the course of a couple of years. It's usually $4,000 that is paid out over the 4 years' worth of work, but she didn't catch it last year. So she said to me, do you mind if I split up over 3 years? I said, go ahead and budget for it. But she did confirm to me that both previous Nancy Morrison and Marion Lennon both received it, or received a stipend for being in the federal census. It seems like that is the culture of the town, and so I wasn't going to I wasn't going to recommend something on that, because that seems what the town normally does. So obviously, if the town wants to change its opinion, it can, but I just didn't touch it for those reasons.
So it's a practice we've always had. Is it a practice consistent amongst other communities?
You know, that I didn't know, but it's a little bit difficult because, for example, in Plainville, which is a very comparable town to us, ever since I've remembered, they've always had 2 assistants. We only have 1. So if I just base it on does she receive extra compensation, it may not be a fair comparison, but I don't know. I didn't do that analysis. Again, I will say this, when it comes to the town clerk's budgets, for the most part, it's our only full-time elected official. She is directly represented by the people, and if town meeting has always supported this additional compensation, because it is more work. I mean, every 10 years there's more work. So if town meeting has always said in the past they would pay for it, I don't think it was right for me to weigh in on it. It's the town people's money. But I don't know. I can't answer the question, unfortunately.
Okay. I'd support the reduction that David made of $1,450.
I'll make a motion to that effect.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Next, I'll skip the ones with that no one had any recommendations of changes on. So I'll skip down to the planning board. Denise, did you want to speak to that one as well?
So I made a recommendation of $1,520, and that was based on there were no actual expenses in the prior 2 years. Now, I understand plans come before them, but plans have been coming before them every year. Why are there suddenly expenses in 2008 for this fiscal year when there have been no expenses in prior years? The work hasn't changed.
Yeah, so when I went through this budget, I mean, when I go through budgets, I don't just make decisions in the dark. I always have conversations with the department head or the respective chairs. I've had a conversation with Chairman Hurley. I agree with you. For example, the engineering services he has not spent over the last couple of years, but as he reminds me, is it as subdivisions come in, sometimes you need the money. So he said he would hate to see himself not have the flexibility to do what they call a peer review. So I just went based on his recommendation. I mean, I understand when we just look at it purely from a budgetary standpoint, how he hasn't spent it. But I just looked at it and said, it's a planning board. We all know we're getting subdivisions. We all know that there's growth in town. I think Mr. Hurley has always done a really good job of protecting his budget and not spending it all. If he doesn't spend it, you know, it goes back to free cash. So I just didn't make a recommendation, but I fully understand where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, I'm not questioning the quality of their work. I'm just saying that, and I understand it all goes back to free cash at the end of the day. But if the money is not being spent and we're allocating it into a budget, then that's coming out of the taxpayers' money to pay. And we've had subdivisions come into town and we've spent nothing for these services. So I don't know why suddenly in 2018 we're adding that in.
No. This has been level funded year after year. He just hasn't spent it. We've always supported it. He just
Okay.
hasn't spent it.
Okay, so for clarification, we've never spent anything on it. Why budget for something? We've had buildings and subdivisions occur over the past 2 years.
I think my last conversation with Hugh was anticipating of that subdivision, West Chestnut Street, there that's going to probably take a lot of the, but that's in the future. That's now in court. It's under litigation. We should be hearing about that. Right now, it's the mayor in Brockton is very, very against it because he won't be getting the taxes, but it's a big situation up there. And I know that's going to, if it's going to take the planning board, that's where some of the money's going to be used. But how would you, if they're not using it now, we got to think of now, you know? And then later on, if it comes to the future, we're just going to have to allocate the money to them, you know?
I mean, I don't really have strong feelings either way on this one. It does seem like they don't typically utilize it. But I do think there has to be a little bit of room on these, especially these smaller ones where the budget's so small that $1,000 difference that might mean them having to come through the process of the FinCom reserve into the Board of Selectmen for even a few $100s. And I think that's partly why it's here, is to try to avoid that process. I don't know, and I know, I mean, maybe partly why they haven't used it in a number of years is because there's currently 2 engineers sitting on the board. So they have the expertise right there, and I don't know if they'll always be there or if they have any intentions of leaving in the near future, but.
I'll make a motion, we go along with Denise's recommendation.
Can I second my own motion?
Yeah, that's Eldon's.
My,
did you
my
make a
own
motion?
recommendation, rather, sure, then
Sorry, you made the
I'll
motion. All right,
second
I'll
my
second.
recommendation.
I'll second your motion.
All in favor?
All right, thank you.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that one will be reduced, David? Yep. By 15, 20.
Yep, thank you.
I'll skip down to wastewater treatment facilities. Denise, I know you had a recommendation on this. Just so you know, there is an expense moving over from the school to the wastewater treatment. It's a few $1,000s. So I don't know if that changes your opinion there.
It does change my opinion. I didn't know that, so I am okay with the
Okay.
town administrator's recommendation of not changing that budget.
Okay. Eldon, do you want to second that motion?
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, police department. David had recommended a $10,000 reduction coming from the, I think, other staff line where the part-time dispatchers are paid out of. Denise, you had recommended a decrease then an increase for the SRO. Did you want to briefly explain that?
So the increase I recommended was based on the historical use of electricity and gas. And I thought those two lines were much higher than they needed to be. But then I also recommended $75,000 be added to their budget for an SRO. And that would net to actually an increase in the police department's budget to $66,000. Now, I know the security resource officer is something that the school department has decided against, but I believe we need it. I know it's sort of like insurance, that you spend money on it until the day you need it. But
They're
in this-
actually, sorry, they're actually all in favor of it. It's just
The
going to be a
school-
warrant article.
Well, right. I guess my feeling is it shouldn't be a warrant article. I think it should actually be an expense because it will likely be a recurring expense we'll have.
My opinion is to keep it on as its own article, let the town decide at town meeting, then probably the next year would move it into the police department, assuming it is approved at town meeting. I just think it's a more clear way of having the people decide on if they want to hire an additional person or not, rather than being built in with a budget. And then it would move over to the police department in year 2.
I also concur with Anthony, and I feel the same on that article.
Okay. And for the electricity and gas, I know electricity, David went out to bid maybe 6 months ago on the electrical rate. So the electrical, different than the aggregation or the, what we have on our electricity bills. The town bids out their own electrical supply just for town buildings. And it went up, I think, 2 cents per kWh, David, something like that. So there will be a substantial increase for all town buildings next year.
So if it's going up 2 cents per kilowatt hour, what is that as a percentage? Because there were significant increases. I mean, I might be wrong on my percentages, but I think the electricity line went up by over 20%.
So it went from 9 cents to 11 or something like that?
No, it was cheaper. It was originally 7.86, and it went up close to 10. I think it was 9.9 and 9.7, it was 9.8 when I came in. But yeah, it's a 2 cents, but it went from 7.8 to about 9.8.
Okay, so yeah, that's
That's 23, 20,
30%.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's going to go from electricity, you anticipate going from $24,000 to $30,000?
No,
Is
they
the
just,
best we could do for electricity rates? I'm confused.
Yeah, I mean, we're all paying 11 at our house.
I mean, we're still cheaper than you can get on your own, so we had it was a 3-year deal. We had a really good rate at 7.86. It still came in the high 9s, which is lower than what people are going to pay. And this is not just a summer rate or a winter rate. This is your rate now locked in for a handful of years. Just that's the price of electricity. They budget $30,000 every single year. They have not traditionally spent it the last couple of years, although previous years they had. And so I just kept it level funded at that. But the chairman makes a good point that there is no doubt that the rate is going up. So whatever they did spend, assuming no additional usage, the bill will be higher.
And that was the same comment I had with regards to the gasoline line. It had 22,000 actual in 2016, 24,000 actual in 2017, and year-to-date through December, 9,600, yet we're budgeting $35,000.
Yep, so I will say this, that according to current numbers, the $35,000 certainly leaves room there. However, if we go back 5 years, when gas prices had spiked up to 3 to 4, they were in excess of $35,000. Even today, I mean, I went to Cumbies, the price is up today. I mean, I just, if gas goes back up over $3 a gallon, you're gonna see most of that used. If it stays at $2.50, it goes down to $2, we won't see it used. Police need cars. And so my feeling is that I want to make sure that they have enough money to put gas in the cars. I will 100% concede that based on yesterday's gas prices, $35,000 is more than we need. But again, a couple of years ago, it wasn't enough. And because it's variable, it's not within our control, I just don't think that it's right to ask a police chief on gasoline to budget based on what we all know is historically low gas prices a year ago, and knowing that in May of next year, there's a chance he's gonna be looking for a transfer just for gasoline. I think that's just a basic commodity that he needs for us to run his department. So I level funded it. I fully get the argument, but I just, gasoline's just one of those things you don't control.
My issue is that these overages, or when these line items aren't spent, it goes into the general fund, or free cash,
It does.
and that's already taken out of the taxpayer's pocket, and we don't know, you're right, we don't know if we need it, so I'm not saying let's send the police cars around with no gas. It just seems like a very high increase to me. But if you feel gas prices are going to go up as a commodity to that level and it'll be needed, then who am I to argue with that?
Well, that's what's being reported out, that that's gonna increase, and we're probably going as high as $3 a gallon.
Okay, I'm the first one to admit that I'm hoping it goes back down to 2 for lots of us.
Doesn't look like it.
But I think we're hamstringing a department head if we say, we know gas was really low the last couple of years. Nobody can debate that point. And what we're going to do is we're going to structure our future budgets around lower gasoline prices. Sooner or later, we're going to get into a problem. And what will happen is at a later date, when we come in and say we need to increase that budget 10 grand, people are really going to be upset at that point. I would rather make sure it's funded, make sure the police department can do their core function, and at the end of the year, if they don't use the money, then it goes back to the town. I just think that that's a fair and reasonable approach.
Well, it just doesn't necessarily go back to the town. It goes into free cash and gets spent on something we need, but not necessarily something we planned on needing, whereas we planned on gas. I mean, I'm not gonna beat a dead horse with this.
So just to that broad point, so in return, we're paying cash for things and we're not borrowing, so our annual bond repayment is zero or reduced by paying for it with cash. So if we had to borrow, if we didn't have that free cash, then we'd have to increase our operating budget to pay for the bond.
But
So essentially by holding a DOR recommends 10% of the annual budget. So by holding that, we essentially keep taxes more flat rather than having ups and downs annually.
I disagree with that philosophy slightly, only because some of the items we're purchasing for cash, such as the trucks, are capital assets, which we could have borrowed against, and albeit at the end of 5 years, you may pay more because you have interest. You've taken a capital asset, spread the cost over 5 years, so it's not as much of a hit to the taxpayer, whereas raising, let's say, $500,000 is more of a hit. I believe during a finance committee meeting, David explained that the school budget, to raise $500,000, 2.5% of what's raised on the residential tax rate. So if you raise the residential tax rate 2.5%, there's your $500,000. Whereas taking the cost, or taking $500,000 and spreading it over, let's say 5 years, is a much softer hit on the taxpayers. Have I explained that correctly?
I think it would actually have the opposite effect. So you'd actually, so 500 grand for trucks, if we were to borrow for them, that means we'd have to increase the operating budget by a little over 100 grand. So if it's bonded over 5 years.
Correct.
So the annual operating budget would increase more, and then sometimes when we didn't have any capital purchases, it would decrease substantially. And then that next year when we needed more trucks or whatever the asset is, it would jump back up, if not more, to where it was the previous year. So it would keep going up and down year on year instead of having more predictability.
No, maybe I didn't explain it clearly. So I take that $500,000, divide it by 5 years, it's $100,000. Whereas if I wanted to raise $500,000 in 1 year, it would be a harder hit on the taxpayer.
We aren't raising it all in 1 year, though. It's essentially surplus from previous years.
But that was money that was paid
Over
by
a
the
number of years,
taxpayers.
yes.
So what I'm saying is you take that cash, $500,000, if we had a need to raise that in 1 year, it would be a much harder hit on the taxpayer than borrowing it and spreading the costs over 5 years.
Yeah, if we had to
I'm-
do it all in 1 year.
I'm not a
absolutely.
fan of, 100% fan of debt financing, but it structures the debt over a longer period and again has a softer hit on the taxpayer's pocket.
All right.
But
In the sake of
David-
time, so back to the police department. So do we have a motion on that?
I have a motion to leave it alone, take David, administrator's suggestion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, fire department. David had recommended a reduction of about 8,500.
I didn't understand where David came up with 8,500. I actually came up with less. I came up with $4,824.
The reason being is because there was a reduction in 2 lines. In line 5112, which is clerical salaries, is that when the fire chief was here, he was looking to reclassify his secretary. And the board at that point had stated that they were not going to reclassify. And so as a result, I reduced that line by $3,400, actually $3,437. But I reduced that line because we are not going to reclassify. And then the difference I took out of permanent salaries. Normally that's a contractual line, which obviously it is. However, we have had a couple of senior firefighters leave us, and we're going to replace some younger people. So therefore, I felt comfortable that we would be able to save about $5,000 in that line. In fairness to the chief, he was unaware of this in December, November, when he's putting the budget together. So that's why the 2 of those lines combined came to $8,437. Okay.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No. So I would make a motion to agree with the town administrator's
Is
recommendation
there a
of a
second?
reduction.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Building inspector. Do you have a motion for recommendation for the reduction of 19,330?
Yeah, there was actually an error there, Anthony. David had recommended the reduction of 19,330, but I didn't recommend a reduction in that line.
Okay.
And it goes back to the philosophy of we're having more building in town, and it appears to me that the building inspector's department is not receiving any additional hours or staffing for these needs. So I wasn't understanding why that reduction was agreed to. I mean, maybe I'm incorrect because I don't understand the complete process, but it would seem to me that would be a department that would be equally as busy as zoning or planning board, but yet they appear understaffed.
Yeah, I know a while ago, maybe a couple months ago, David had pulled the number of permits and that sort of thing. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's really changed that much over the past couple of years. I think one of the bigger problems now with the office is we have someone in there who has dedicated many years to that office and to the town, so has built up over about 30 years. I think she's been here almost. She has a decent amount of vacation time. So that's one of, I think, the building inspector's biggest concerns, but it's just, in my opinion anyway, hard to justify another part-time person, especially if it's a part-time permanent position where those hours are already set, and would not necessarily fluctuate based on the other clerk's vacation and the time that she's out. So the building inspector right now, he still does a great job. I don't think there's ever been any issues of not being able to get out for an inspection. He's always out within 48 hours. I just, I don't know. I don't necessarily see the need for the $20,000 in another
Well, I was in there
part-time
today,
person.
and I think that, we gotta look at that office. You notice all of us, we got the beautiful paint jobs and everything else. That down there is got to be worked in on that office. And really, I'd like to see a new, a part-timer in there or so, because I know, that office is really busy, and he's doing a great job. But I think he needs our cooperation here too.
So what about an amendment and meet in the middle between not funding it and funding it fully, and at least allowing for some part-time hours at $10,000?
I would be amended to that.
I just, the only, if the board wants to go that route, that's fine. He's recommending 16 hours per week, so if you cut it in half, you would be getting about 8 hours per week. Whether or not you can hire somebody consistently at 8 hours per week is a different story. I think I just want to make sure that there was a rationale or methodology to my recommendation, is that the town is growing. It is not just growing over the last couple of years. It has grown over the past 15 to 20 years. I'm a strong believer that we need to do something in our fire department, our police department, and probably a couple of departments, and eventually the building department. But his rationale is that over the last 5 years that they have gotten busier. And the reality is, the numbers do not justify that. I'm looking at them. I'm not looking at what I pulled. I'm looking at what he provided. And when I sat with him and I said, some of these numbers do not tell the story that you're telling me that you're telling. He understood where I was coming from, because in certain categories it's higher, in certain other categories it's flat, and in certain other ones it's down. My feeling is that we had a previous building inspector. He was just as busy as our current one is 2 to 3 years ago, and he didn't request an additional person. The real struggle right now is that the current clerical person does have ample vacation time. That's the difficult part. And I just don't see or think it's prudent to hire someone just because we have somebody who has a lot of vacation time, because that's in essence what we would be doing. But again, if you want to try to fund for half of it, and let's see if we can hire someone, then we can do that.
Well, you have a student, I believe, that works in this, in your office, part-time.
Yeah. So I've started an internship program funded at $5,000 a year, and that person helps us on special projects. I would not recommend that we could do something like that in the building department, because there's certain expertise somebody needs to know. For example, you go there and you say, what is the setback requirement for an accessory building? A grad student's not going to know the definition of an accessory building or a setback. And so you would have to hire somebody to legitimately learn what those are and then be able to look it up. So if we were to hire somebody, then my recommendation is to actually fund it and hire someone. If you want to try halfway, then we'll try it halfway. But I don't think an internship program would work. That person would never get trained appropriately.
Well, I was thinking in lieu of hiring someone, or, a specific intern for that department, would your intern have any available hours to help out in there when Karen's on vacation or out sick or whatever?
I'm open to it. My fear is this. I'm a resident. I go to the building department and I say the following, as I just said, to the intern. What is the setback on my accessory building? That intern doesn't know. That intern then turns the information over to the building inspector, who's gained no valuable time, because now he has to call the person back and give him the answers anyway. In the meantime, the special projects that I would be having that person work on can't, because they're down there not being able to provide adequate answers. So if you would want us to do it that way, I mean, it's a policy decision. We'll do it.
I think with setbacks, David, I understand what you're saying, but with something simple like I'm going to buy an 8x10 shed. What do I need for that? Do I need a permit? No, it's replacing the same size shed you had. Okay, you're done. That customer's taken care of. The customer the resident that comes in with a simple question, the intern could field those questions, answer them, and then save the more difficult questions for when the building inspector is available.
So you would have somebody there. See,
That's right.
That's the thing. I agree with you.
We do have 1 or 2 seniors in the office who are at least there to answer the phone or take messages, so that the office is not left empty. So that it's kind of similar to the suggestion of the intern.
like I said, utilizing the intern we have in the town administrator's office to help out as needed in there. So that
Right.
might be a solution that wouldn't incur any additional expenses. And we are holding up the finance committee.
Yeah. Okay, so do we have a motion for the building inspector?
Or is that a Pat?
Can I ask a question before you vote?
Sure.
I know there's the tax work-off. Would it be, I mean, I hate to say cheaper, but
There's,
is it another option to
they
add
currently
another-
utilize it. Oh, another one? I
add
think,
another one instead of adding?
so that would actually come out of a different budget. I don't know if there's any more. David, do you know? I mean, we could probably get as many as we wanted in reality, but we'd have to increase that.
Exactly. So right now, the Board of Selectmen, through the years, just over the past 5 years, you've increased your senior tax workout program from a cap of 25,000 to 36 or 37,000 off the top of my head. You would have to increase that cap because we have more people coming in than we can afford.
Yep.
But by all means, if you want to increase that cap, we can look at that and use another senior tax workoff person.
So that would again be separate from this budget if we wanted to do that.
Right.
At this point, I'd recommend we make the recommended reduction that the administrator made.
All right, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Could I ask a question, Anthony?
Yes.
It's 6:45. We were supposed to be done at 6:30, and Finance Committee was supposed to start at 6:30.
Okay.
I don't know if we need to stop now, or could we?
No, we need to finish this up so that
Okay.
they can then vote on our recommendations. So it looks like we can do gas and electrical together if someone has a motion for those.
We already, David and I already agreed, and I think we voted on that the other night, didn't we?
We did not take
Oh, we
any
didn't
votes last
vote,
the other
okay.
time.
So I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation on the gas plumbing inspector and the electrical inspector.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so the next one is canine control.
So canine control, line 2920, I recommended a $2,000 cut, and again, that was based on historical costs. I realize it's not a lot of money, but this is another issue where we haven't spent it. Our highest cost was $6,349 in 2016, and I believe it was even much less in prior years. And now we're jumping up to $8,250. I don't know what the rationale was.
So they've budgeted $82.50 for at least all the years that I've been here. They have historically spent low sixes. There's no doubt that there is about $2,000 overage in there. Again, if you want to cut it, fine. My feeling is that if we're going to cut it directly to what they have always spent, we better not have any extra dogs go loose. I mean, it's variable. I mean, you just don't know. And so, again, I'd hate to put the police chief in a position where in May, he's hoping that we don't have to get a dog call. I mean, that was my only thinking, but that's my only rationale for it. I mean, there is no doubt that based on historical trends, he spends about $2,000 less. But he did not request $82.50 as an increase. That's just what we've always historically budgeted.
That includes, I think, when I watched the presentation, there's $150 that we contribute if an animal's caught not picked up after so many days.
Yep, so it's
Yeah.
it's $100, and the reason being is because state law is after 10 days, if nobody picks up the dog must be destroyed. The police chief, to his credit, said instead of killing the dog, let's donate $100 to an association that actually will then bring the dog somewhere else to a family. So that's why he did it that way. It's the same dollar amount. He's trying to save some dogs.
So we are, that's what I didn't understand about the presentation. We're making that contribution of $100, but I didn't get confirmation, again, from listening to the meeting, that's what they're using that money for.
They're going to spend it one way or the other.
So I understand they're going to spend it, but I want to make sure if we're giving it to them, they're using it to save the dog and not euthanize them.
That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, again, with these smaller budgets, same thing as the planning board, I just hate to get too close to the point where they have to either stop doing work or come to the selectmen and finance committee before they can spend another dollar, when it's not much in a dollar amount.
And I'll make a motion to accept the town administrator's recommendation of level funding that budget.
Second the motion.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, the next one is the school education. For this one, David had recommended a reduction of 75,000, 25 of which was the reduction for the SRO. So it's, in essence, a $50,000 reduction. Denise, did you want to speak to that one?
So I had a recommendation of $170,087, and I went back and listened to the finance committee's meeting, I think of, it was in March, when the school came in, and then subsequently listened when Southeastern Regional came in and helped to explain that magical mystery formula of how they come out with it. Again, the recommendations were based on several different lines, which included transportation, utilities, and tuition, and those were compared to amounts to prior years. With regards to transportation, I believe one of the questions came up during the Finance Committee's meeting is the cost of the transportation, and it was explained that a bus was added, but it was never explained how much that incremental cost of the bus was. They also didn't explain the increase in the contract. I don't believe there was an explanation for the amount of the increase in the contract. So it just seemed like a large number that hadn't been fully explained to the Finance Committee. With regards to the utilities, and I think you explained that, David, already, I looked at that, saw a large increase, but you said it's going to be, what, a 20% increase in the rate on kilowatt hour? So unbeknownst to me, and tuition, paying out tuition, again, historically, it seems like we have more students wanting to come here than we have students wanting to leave. And the school also has an option, not a significant increase, but an option to increase student choice coming in, which would bring in extra money to the schools. Now, my understanding is the contractual arrangement with the teachers is to try to keep the class level, the student level, at a certain number, but it's not a hard number. It's not written that they have to stay at that level. But it's option. I mean, we don't want classrooms of 30 students, obviously, but there could be a increase in school choice students accepted, and we would still be in compliance with the contracts.
David, you have a chance to talk to the administrator on this particular cut?
Well, I spoke to her when I made the original $75,000 reduction. I just did it because I looked at the math. The school department, excluding the water department, because they're an enterprise fund, not taxation, is the only budget that carries sick time buyback within its budget. So, for example, a police department, if they have somebody that retires, their sick time buyback's in our benefits budget. The school is the only one that carries it. So obviously that's a one-time legacy cost. So if I take away that legacy cost and I reduce it by 75,000, I came out to a budget increase of 2.5%. And, you know, I can't spend enough time to be able to fully pierce that budget. I mean, it's 12.5, 13 million plus school choice. So I looked at it and I said, if we could get our budget to only go up 2.5% on an operational standpoint, I thought that was fair. It gives them what they're looking for to continue the services they provide, and it was also fair to the taxpayer. So that's how I came up with it. It's, you know, whatever you want to do, but that's how I came up with it.
Yeah, I mean, both David and I expressed our dissatisfaction with the substantial increase during the selectmen's meeting when they presented. I think you were here for that. I don't think any of us want to see such a substantial increase, but I spent time with Patty after that. I talked to her on Friday. She explained some more things to me about what it would mean if her reduction was taken further than the $50,000 that David had originally recommended. It sounds like that could have severe impacts, and I mean, I'd love to save the tax money on that too, but I think that anything beyond that is going to have significant impacts that are going to cost us in the long run. She was talking about it would mean reduction in the actual staffing in the classrooms if it got to anything beyond David's recommendation. One of the things she did mention was the bus. They increased the bus. I don't remember if she gave me the exact number that it increased. But she did say that the transportation line was funded appropriately for the bus. What else was there? There's one other.
Chapter 70 funds there, that's a very erratic.
Yeah.
Well,
Denise
that
knows
just-
about that one.
And that's what, I don't mean to interrupt you, Anthony,
it's fine.
but
Go
I
ahead.
thought it was interesting when Southeastern Regional, the director, I believe was his title, explained that one of the reasons why Brockton was getting, I think, over 70% of Chapter 70 funds and we were getting only 30% was because of our assessed values on our homes.
Yep.
And our median income, which again goes back to, it begs the question, is median income really a good figure to look at? It should be the mode, the most occurring, frequently occurring number, not the median, because that can be easily skewed. I mean, I'm not going to argue
Yeah, no,
that formula right now,
I think
but
we all completely agree with you on that
yeah,
one.
but the fact is, and the finance committee expressed as much, if not more, concern about the school budget and the impact on the taxpayers. It seems like they always manage year to year. And I'm just having difficulty with a reduction of only $75,000. I don't think it's going to cause a big impact, and if you bring in 10 more school choice students, you pick up $50,000 right there.
They're very stretched for space, I know, in school choice. I forget what grades are accepting, but there's a lot that aren't accepting right now. They do get plenty of applicants, but right now it's just the space for them. I just don't think, I have to have faith in the superintendent when she tells me that if it's more than this amount, there's gonna be serious consequences. And I don't feel comfortable taking that chance in playing with it to see what happens if we do this.
Did she explain what the serious consequences were and why she couldn't avoid those serious consequences? I mean, were we up against a wall?
Are we up against the wall? I don't know. But reduction in staff is definitely one of the things that she mentioned, which means less aides, less teachers per student, and I think that alone has severe impacts on the education that we're providing. Unfortunately, I don't think we can do it.
Well, I trust you. I mean, this is my first year, and I only had these budgets for 3 days. And clearly, I didn't have a chance to meet with anyone.
What I have
talk
the problem
about it.
is when she was in here and we didn't bring this up at the time there, and now at the late date there, this is brought up. I have a big problem with that issue.
Well, I
I'd
wasn't
like to
here.
make a motion that we go along with the town administrator's recommendation of $75,000.
Is there a second? I'll second the motion. All in favor?
Right.
Denise, are you for or opposed?
I'm opposed.
Actually, just capture the vote.
Moving on to the DPW.
And the DPW might be in error because I may have misunderstood the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Selectman Raisin, I didn't have a chance to speak during the day, so I had a $2,000 reduction, but in speaking to her right before the meeting, I think you're telling me you did not have a reduction. So if that's the case, I apologize.
No, we were actually, David Rapp was the building inspector. I'm sorry, not the building inspector's department. I didn't have the reduction on. I agreed with you on that line item.
So you're okay with DPW?
I'm okay with
Okay,
DPW.
all right, thank you.
Could we have a motion for the DPW?
I agree with the town administrator's recommendation of a $2,000 reduction.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, waste disposal, David had a recommendation of 1,000. Is there anyone opposed to that, or is there a recommendation for that? Or did I,
Motion to agree.
All right, second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the Women's Place Crisis Center, David made a recommendation for a $250 reduction. Is there a motion for that?
Motion to agree.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Old Colony Hospice. David had recommended keeping that level funded. Denise or Eldon, do you have any other input on that?
I recommended increasing it by the amount they requested, which is only $500. And I understand this is more of a donation, but as a town with a high percentage of seniors, I think
Yeah, they're very active.
they're very active. And $500 seems like a very silly amount to be squabbling about when so many residents receive the benefit of hospice, especially with the rising costs of medical insurance.
Okay, I'll second the motion, Denise, I'll go along with you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Veterans, David had made a recommendation for a $15,000 decrease. Do I have either a motion or any discussion on that?
My only
Go along
comment.
with the, decrease.
Okay, that's a motion. Did you have a question or comment first,
No,
Denise?
the only comment I was going to make is that I agreed with that particular reduction based on historical spending.
Yeah, the spending's very low. We pay almost just as much in salaries as we give away to veterans. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, library, the town administrator had made a recommendation of a reduction of $1,000. Is there a motion or discussion on that?
I recommended $2,000, but again, it was based on historical costs and me thinking that the aggregate electricity price we had negotiated was going to help us, but clearly it has nothing to do with it.
Okay, so is there a motion for either the town administrator's recommendation of 1,000 or for an additional 1,000 to 2,000?
I'll agree with 1,000.
Okay,
I'll second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that is all the changes.
That's correct. So if I could just have one blanket vote, please, that all the ones that we did not discuss, that you will just approve or recommend as presented, and that way I can then total this all up and bring it to the Finance Committee.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's nothing else before the board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.